Welcome to our first Cultural Engagement Chapel of the spring. So those of you who are veterans of foreign wars know how these work. We cover a variety of topics. And today we're going to take a look in line with yesterday at some issues of diversity, particularly with regard to the Hispanic community and the Hispanic church. So I have this illustrious panel that we have gathered together of people who are connected to the DTS and Español program. On the end over there is Michael Ortiz, who I call Miguel, who directs the DTS and Español program. And then we have Nancy Frazier, who makes Miguel work, right? Is that basically, she's working with the DTS and Español program. And then Marlon Rios is a student here at DTS. And Marlon, how close are you to getting out of this fine institution, at least with your THM?
I can already see a huge light at the end of the tunnel.
That light will shine, at the end of the summer?
At the end of the summer.
So this man is living with real eschatological hope. Okay, so it does happen. Those of you who are first year, there does come a time when we actually say you're free to go. Actually, it's not free to go, but anyway. So we're going to discuss issues particularly related to the Hispanic community and the Hispanic church. We did a variation of this a little over, about this time last year with the Asian students here on campus, and we would periodically do this just to help people understand the different dimensions of the different cultures that are a part of our campus. You know, yesterday Tripp said that one of the ways to facilitate really becoming a body and having a unity is this ability to get to know people who are different than yourself. So this is a way of kind of facilitating that. So let me begin this way. Marlon, talk about what, in your view, makes Hispanic culture distinct from perhaps some of the other cultures that are on campus.
Well, I'm Mexican. I was born and raised in Mexico and came to the U.S. when I was 7. And something that is very unique, I feel, about Hispanics, in particular about Mexicans, is that we're very family orientated. So we'd rather be late to work than be late to a party or a quinceañera. And if those of you that are familiar, our parties are very biblical. We go for days. And we see a big majority of Hispanics are Roman Catholic. So for us, Roman Catholicism is not just a religion. It's part of who we are. It's part of our culture. It's part of where we come from. And we do that on a daily basis in everything that we do in life. So I think that's something that we bring to the table that's very unique in particular about Hispanics.
And then, Nancy, tell us, we're using the word Hispanic, but that actually hides a lot of stuff. So what does the term Hispanic hide?
Well, I think what it tends to do is erase it kind of blankets it as a homogeneous kind of experience, which it's not. So I think one of the differences that you see in the uniqueness of a Hispanic person is the diversity within Hispanicism, right? So there is racial diversity that's very much present. And it encompasses the similarities that we have between me and Marlon, right? We're both from Mexico. We're both from the same state. We have a similar background, but I'm also biracial, right? So I was born to a Mexican father, a white mother. And then Dr. Ortiz is Cuban. And so those experiences are very diverse. And so I think sometimes that can be hidden behind this blanket term of Hispanic that really connects to the language we speak. And of course, you can be Hispanic and not actually speak Spanish, right? That is a very common experience in the United States, especially as you get into second, third, fourth generation Hispanics.
So if I say Argentina to you, what does that mean?
It's a beautiful country in South America.
And so what does that translate into? That means that in interacting with someone, you not only need to recognize that there's a Hispanic background, but there's a particular background beyond that actually may be more important in understanding who they are in some ways.
It is. The language will change. You don't speak the same Spanish across Hispanic countries. The food is very different. Mexican people love spicy food. That's actually really unique to Mexicans. It's just honoring the diversity of each person. And I think what tends to happen often is that because we're in Texas, we're so close to the Mexico border, there's an assumption that the Hispanic people you meet are Mexican people, and we need to be careful of that in order to honor the diversity of Hispanics.
So just to dig a little bit more into this, how does someone from Mexico view someone, say, from Central America or from South America? What's the inner conversation like between groups, or is there such a conversation?
You're still talking to me, right?
Yeah, I'm still going.
Yeah, there's a shared experience there. So there's a connection that can be made. Marlon talked about the community and importance of family, and I think that is part of the shared experience. There's also kind of learning from each other. So it becomes a conversation that you might have with someone that isn't Hispanic that includes learning from each other in a way that we can honor and respect each other, and still have kind of a common language. So it starts with a common root, and then it's about diversifying from there and recognizing. And actually, what you get is from someone like me, who's from Mexico, and someone like Natasha, who works for our department, is from Venezuela, is that there is an automatic recognition that there's a difference there. It's not something that I have to stumble through. I know that her experience is different than mine because she's from a completely different country.
Okay, Miguel, help us understand the Cuban dimension of this, if you will, because Cuba had a particular relationship, in particular with the United States over the last half century or so. Does that impact the way in which people interact with people from Cuba, and does that impact the way the Cubans see themselves?
I think it absolutely does, and I think what happened with Cuba, with the Fidel Castro and the embargo that ensued after that, and still is in place, and so on, it's created a culture there that it is isolated, yet it wants to reach out to the rest of the world as much as it can. And so what happens when they come here to the United States, they have much to learn about our setting and otherwise. But I think that one of the things that even Cubans do, quite frankly, is they don't, one of the things they do for the most part is not consider themselves Latino or Latina, for instance, okay? Mm-hmm. Because they are from the Caribbean. So they're a Caribbean-based Hispanic culture rather than one from Latin America. So even for them, they would make that type of distinction, even being within Cuba.
So let's talk a little bit about the church experience. And Marlon, you've already alluded to this, that there's this influence of Roman Catholicism that's important. So let's talk first about the relationship between Roman Catholicism and the evangelical presence among Hispanics. How do you see that relationship?
Well, it's a tough one because, like I said, for us, at least for Mexicans, religion is very important. So when God saved my dad, he was considered a traitor within our family and our background, and so it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of Catholics and evangelicals we have a lot of things in common, but I think sometimes the evangelical church, at least the way I've experienced it, is we tend to separate the religious part from the cultural part, not realizing that this is not just a Sunday thing or a Saturday thing. I mean, a lot of Mexicans, they wear their rosarios and they have tattoos all over their body because to them their religious background, their religious experience is so important. And it seems like it's a very thin line to cross, but at the same time, it's very, very, very hard because we sometimes feel like we're walking on eggshells if we try to touch certain aspects of the saints and certain aspects of religion.
Now you're talking about evangelicals who are interacting with this larger culture.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And so the challenges that presents, now you've connected this to family as well. So this ends up being a particularly sensitive situation within a family when someone embraces evangelical faith, if I can say it that way, and yet at the same time is supposed to show respect for the family, et cetera. Explain what those dynamics can be like and that challenge of it.
Okay. So I guess one of the biggest challenges is that for the evangelical church to reach the Catholic Church, I feel that sometimes we're not willing to dig deep into what that implies. So, for example, an experience that I can tell you is that, and I promise the Ph.D. department is not paying me to say this, but for me, having a little knowledge of the fathers and the patristics was a big part because all of my family, 95% of my family is still Roman Catholic, hardcore Roman Catholic. So I had not had a decent conversation with my grandmother in about a decade. But when I started talking about Ignatius of Antioch, for example, and she's like, oh, yeah, he's the one that said the Catholic Church. And I was like, yeah, and he's also the one that said, that the Eucharist was the medicine of immortality. And so after 10 years, I realized that getting to know, like, even though I grew up Catholic, there's a lot of things that I was not willing to touch or to even dig deep into. But when I realized that we have common ground, she, at the end of a conversation, she tapped me on the back and she said, good, son, I'm glad you're learning something. So I realized that for me, for my family, there's a lot of that really helped me in terms of academic-wise, that's something that we can take from here and use to reach the Hispanic and Latino culture. Because for us, religion is very important. So if you're kind of like, if you know anything, if you know something, if you know about Augustine and Aquinas, then they're gonna open the door.
Interesting. Nancy, anything you want to add to that?
Actually, my family wasn't Roman Catholic, so there's a huge difference. I think part of the complexity of the issue with Catholicism is that so much of Hispanic Catholicism and Latin American Catholicism is there's a lot of syncretism that's present as part of it that becomes part of the conversation. So as far as evangelicalism goes, there is you've begun to see, I think, in Latin America and Mexico, kind of this growing and burgeoning of evangelicalism, so that there is something there that is beginning to interact with the Catholic roots. But I think, like Marlon has said, as far as Mexico is concerned, it's still very much a Catholic country. And so just learning how to navigate some of that historical syncretism that really comes out of Spanish colonization it becomes really important for the person who's trying to dialogue.
And Miguel, what about it? What in the context of either Cuba or Central or South America?
Yeah, I think Cuba is similar in the sense that it historically it's been mostly a Catholic country, although constitutionally the government is atheistic. But the population as a whole, because it was a Spanish-founded colony, basically, they do have a lot of Catholicism within the country. And then even when you go there to share the gospel or evangelize or do a church plant or something along those lines, it is not all that difficult because they already, as Marlon was saying, it's a culture that has some sense of who God might be, understands religion up to a certain level, and is willing to talk about it. So for them, it's not all that complicated to take that next step and maybe move them towards an evangelical understanding of the gospel. So.
Now, you've raised something that I think is another feature, generally speaking, of Hispanic culture that may not mirror culture here, the majority culture here, and that is the idea of being able to talk about your religious faith and your walk with God. And I'm going to come back this way, so I'll start with you, Miguel. Talk a little bit about that as a difference. How you've already suggested that people wear their religion on their sleeve in some senses. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of it has already been mentioned in the sense that because most Hispanics have some understanding of Catholicism, it doesn't make it all that much more difficult to open up to that topic. I think what gets a little bit complicated sometimes is which direction do you want to take that conversation towards? Where is it going to? Where are you going to end up on that topic? And it depends on where you are within Latin America or even here in the U.S. What we've seen in Latin America over the last number of years is a growth in the Pentecostal movement, and that has really been led in part, interestingly enough, because of some of the lack of response of the Catholic Church to some of the societal issues that are going on. And so what's happened is that some of the more left-leaning, Pentecostal, charismatic type of churches in Latin America have really blossomed and grown, especially in the rural areas, urban areas, because they are responding to some of these issues within society. What that also does then, as people are migrating into our country here, from Latin America and other places, especially Latin America, they bring with them those Pentecostal-leaning theological foundations. And even pastors and church leaders that are coming here to start churches, they tend to lean in that direction. And so it's an interesting blend of Catholicism, but there's a lot of Pentecostalism that's around as well. And so how do you maneuver through all of that? It gets really rather complex. And then you add on to that the challenge, and what we see in DTS and Español is how do we reach and train Spanish speakers, not just globally, and we have about 20 countries represented in our Spanish program right now, an online program. So it's very diverse, but also here within the U.S., how do we contextualize the program, or how do we teach it in such a way that it fits for where the students are, and it helps them to do a better work within their local churches. So.
Yeah, and just to make sure, because we don't want to happen is to paint kind of a religious stereotype of the Hispanic person that says we're just open to faith because it is part of who we are. But there's very much a movement that's present, particularly in the universities of Latin America, that is very much like you would find in any secular university. The idea that says theological education. What are you talking about? So I spoke recently to a friend who did his graduate studies in the United States in a secular university. I was just touching base about theological education at the university level in South America, in Bolivia specifically, and he said, "What are you talking about? Why would you do that? They don't get educated. That's not how these people think." And so there is very much a presence of people moving into secularism and moving away from religiosity that's also present in Hispanic culture. So I wouldn't want somebody to walk away saying, they're still holding on to this religious part of their identity, which is true, but also very much diverse as much as it would be in the United States, moving towards people that are identifying more as nuns than as non-religious as much as religious.
And Marlon, anything to add to that?
I guess what I can say is just that leapfrogging from what Nancy was saying in regards to the theological preparation. I think that what DTS and Español is doing is something very, very, very particular and very important, because for us as Hispanics, at least here in this country, sometimes education is not even an option. Sometimes education might be the last option. And so when we have this opportunity to actually reach out to Hispanics, it's very important, because you're not only giving them an option to have just this route, but also now having the training here at DTS. So it just helps to kind of share and be proud of the faith as well.
Okay, let me do some housekeeping here. You will see the mics here for questions from the student body. We also have up on the screen a way to text in your question to me, and I've got a way of receiving that here, and in about 10 minutes, I'm going to transition to those. So just an alert, if you have a question that you've formulated that you'd like to ask or text in, please feel free to do that. It's something we always do with a part of these chapels. Let me shift gears and talk about this campus. What are there, and what are, if there are, challenges of being a Hispanic student on the DTS campus? Is there anything in particular that you would address? This is your chance.
Well, for me, I guess one of the challenges that I face is that I'm not supposed to be here. Like the statistics say that I'm not supposed to be here. And for me, just being here, the fact that I'm here, I've felt this. My experience here at DTS has been an incredible experience because I'm given an opportunity to be able to do what any other person can do in regards to the gospel and the church. So the fact that I see other Hispanics and the fact that I see African Americans, Asians, and white people, to me, it's a learning experience because I feel like sometimes people are walking on eggshells in regards to ask, like, where are you from? Because apparently, if you're Mexican, you're short, skinny, and dark brown. Mm-hmm. And so I get everything but Mexican. I get, Arab or Italian, everything. So for me, it's been a great opportunity to actually share it and to welcome those conversations, because I feel that the only way that I'm going to get to know you and you're going to get to know me is if we break that. And I feel that the gospel has already done that, but I feel like I'm very friendly, and the people that know me, that I used to work here on campus, I always want to get to know people and to talk to them and to see who they are, but I sometimes don't feel the same the other way around. And so that's a little frustrating, at least for me, because I'm very social. So, yeah.
Nancy?
Yeah, I think there's a challenge of not fitting into a stereotype, right? You get to be Hispanic if you're brown and maybe speak with an accent and look like what some people think Hispanics look like, right? My dad fits into that picture. I don't so much fit into that picture. My siblings fit a little bit more than I do. And so for that, even getting to identify as Hispanic becomes an issue because of the homogeneity effect, right? That says Hispanics look like this, talk like this, think like this, act like this, and that's media, that's stereotype, and that's fair. It just makes it a little difficult to step into your identity that way. So I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, or kind of people are shocked to find out that I speak Spanish, that I'm fluent in Spanish, that it's my first language, that I was born in Mexico, that all of the things, that becomes a challenge. The other challenge becomes really learning how to express my cultural specifics of my culture, right? So that I get to express myself as a Mexican woman and what that means, and realizing that sometimes it doesn't always feel like there's room to do that as a student, right? I'm in the Ph.D. program, so it's a little bit different for me because my classes are so much smaller. We get to know each other so much more intimately and deeply, and so maybe there's a little bit more room there, but I just finished my THM in 2017, so I'm not that removed from the classroom experience. And so sometimes it becomes, if I express myself culturally, will I suddenly find myself, or my peers think that I'm just the hot-blooded Latina, right? And it turns out that's just Nancy. Like, that's not necessarily, that's just me. So don't blame all Mexicans for that. But that's something that you have to learn to navigate. And so, and the reality is that people of color, there's I think of it as a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of cultural identity, and then there's also a spectrum of assimilation. So people are all across that spectrum, right? There might be somebody who's highly assimilated and has a low racial or ethnic identity. I myself, I think I'm highly assimilated, but but I also have a high cultural identity, and I can maneuver environments differently because of the assimilation and identity. What I would love to see is the opportunity for me to step into a classroom and not have to think about whether I can express myself culturally, and that we're willing to work through the complexity of that, right? Because I'm not ignorant enough to think that that'll happen without it complicating conversations or experiences, but that we would all be willing to actually step into that in a way that's gracious and willing to deal with the messiness of true, not just diversity, but multiculturalism.
Yeah, this is a sidebar, because I also serve on the board at Wheaton. This is a conversation that happens across schools and across cultures. And there really are two ways to think about these relationships that people talk about when they think institutionally like this. And that is, on the one hand, there's what's called assimilating. And assimilating is when someone out of a minority culture learns how to function in light of the majority culture, and the majority culture still controls the way in which people are responding. Then the other way of integrating, if I can say it that way, is when people are given the space to be who they are, no matter which culture they come out of. It's that second level that is the challenge. That is where the difficult conversations have to take place, where mutual understanding has to be developed, that kind of thing, because instinctively the experiences are so different between people, the cultural expectations, assumptions, et cetera, that you just have to work through that. So what's natural for you may not be natural to the student who's sitting next to you, that kind of thing. So, so I appreciate, Nancy, you're expressing this, because this really is one of the ways in which you can engage in this in a healthy kind of way that allows each person to be who God made them and where God has brought them from. Let me ask one more set of questions, and I'm going to turn to the questions that have been texted in, since I don't see anyone at a mic. What is the church experience of Hispanic culture like? And I'm going to draw an analogy, and I'll let you play with this however you want. One of the things that sometimes is hard to understand is for people in majority culture is that churches that are minority-based and minority-built are almost a kind, if I can say this way, cultural refuge for people. It allows them to be who they are in a way that what I just talked about sometimes doesn't allow you to be. So there's that dimension of church life that can exist. But in light of that and beyond that, how is, in the way you can speak about this generically, Hispanic church culture distinct from what someone might be familiar with in our own culture? Or are there such differences?
So for most of my church experience, I grew up in a Hispanic church, predominantly Spanish-speaking. My dad happened to be the pastor. So all of the adult programs were done in Spanish, and then because my mom's concern for children, this was in the United States, being able to navigate their education in English, she chose to do all of the children's programs in English, because a lot of the students, my particular church was predominantly first-generation Mexican immigrants. We were about a quarter of a mile from the border. So that was just our demographic. So you saw this split between helping the children be able to function in their school environments and educationally and all of that, while at the same time connecting with their parents and the first generation. There is this thing, and I think it goes back to the communal aspect of Hispanic culture that Marlon touched on, is that I took for granted the fact that we just would go out to eat with anybody all the time after church. Like, that was just like community extended beyond the service, until I got much older and I found myself in a multicultural church. And for example, the church that I attend now that is very multicultural, and I realized people don't do that. Like, not everybody does that, and having to navigate that has been it's actually been kind of a painful experience, because I'm used to operating out of this idea of we're a family, and that means I'm at your house and you're at my house, and we go out to eat and we're in each other's business, and that's just part of what you do. that people that are not like me don't do that. They like their privacy, and they use words like boundaries that I'm like, what? I don't understand. But learning to work with people through that, that has made me kind of open my eyes to the fact that, hey, I really did have a unique church experience, and that means that I have things to learn as well, right, as I navigate diversity.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people looking from the outside into the Latino or Hispanic church to realize that I grew up in the border. I was born in the border, and I grew up there, so it's a little different. But when I see it here, I see there's a lot more illegal, undocumented immigrants here. So for them, it's like when they see that there's this Hispanic, Latino, evangelical church, that's where they're going to go. That's exactly where they're going to go, because they see that as a place where they can actually express their faith, they can actually express who they are, their thoughts, and just the way that they feel. So at the border, I didn't experience that so much because it was different. 98% of the population at the border is Hispanic. But here, I feel like sometimes it's like the vision that we have of the way that we do church in a big city like Dallas, it's a different experience. It's a different experience that sometimes it's not seen through the eyes of the gospel, just the gospel rather than just a movement that's happening there.
If I can add something, actually, just to point out, the Hispanic church is not just in your en Español churches, right? The Hispanic church is in your church, right? We're everywhere. You can't get rid of us. So I think that that's an important aspect. What you might find is that first generation and second generation tend to gravitate more towards the en Español churches. But we're everywhere. I'm Hispanic. I speak Spanish. I go to a church that has committed to supporting Hispanic ministry, but not through an en Español service. And so that I just wanted to kind of clarify that the Hispanic experience is happening at your churches every single Sunday.
So one of the phenomena that we discussed when we had Asian students was this idea of how multi-generations, as you move to generations, the interaction with the larger culture changes. The first generation operating with English as a second language, the second generation usually at least assimilated linguistically. The third generation may not even speak Spanish. I mean, that's a real possibility. Talk about what that dynamic means in the context of your culture.
Well, I think what we see in a lot of the churches nowadays is trying to wrestle with that issue. How do we minister, especially those churches that have an Español type of church? How do they minister to the first generation that are still predominantly Spanish? The second generation may still want to do some of that, but maybe not quite as much, and then the third as well. So what we say is, how do we keep everyone together with the abuelitos meaning grandparents, right? Mm-hmm. Because part of the Hispanic experience or culture is they want to be together, they want to be within one experience in the church, but how do you do that when you begin to see the different generations trying to move on to English and assimilate further into the culture here in the United States? And that is a continuing challenge for a lot of Hispanic churches, and not just Hispanic churches, but even Anglo-white churches that don't have a Spanish program. How do they integrate with all that?
Okay, one more quick question, and then I'm going to go to these. One other major cultural difference I think that exists is on the topic of tiempo, of time. So talk a little bit about how Hispanics, generally speaking, view time and relationships in relationship to time, because that certainly is something that oftentimes is seen differently.
Let me just make a comment on that then.
Okay.
All right, because here's the way I explain that is, and this is real practical when we consider how do we reach out to Hispanic culture even here within DTS. So what happens is you normally will walk up to someone, and the way that you greet someone is you say, "How are you doing?" All right, something like that. And really all you're really doing is you're just expressing a greeting. But to a Hispanic, even a second or third generation Hispanic, they might say, do they really want to know how I'm doing, or is this just a greeting? And so that's a small but I think an important way, even here at Dallas Seminary, when we see someone from a different culture, not just Hispanic, but if you're going to ask them, how are you doing, have the margin, have the time, have the space to be able to have a conversation with them. And that's where the time issue comes in somewhat. Here, Dr. Bock is just within most of the settings that we navigate through, we are pressed for time to move on to the next thing. And so maybe we could change the class periods to that, so we have a half hour between classes instead of 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So that we can have conversations between classes. I don't know, but it's a minor but important way to recognize Hispanic culture, and that is that if you're going to ask that question or even invite someone into your office to have a conversation, please have that margin of time so you can really have a good conversation with them and let them, because they want to talk, they want to express what they're thinking, they want to express their ideas, they want to be heard, and that part of it is also the trust building factor, because there's so much going on within our political, social, legal systems in our culture right now that are creating a lot of tension within the Hispanic setting around the issue of immigration and other issues, right? And so there's already, you're battling against this trust factor, this rapport building factor. But if you're looking at time as micromanaging your time and limiting the time, it's going to be more difficult.
My boss will tell you I'm always on time for work, right?
Is my microphone on? Or was it off?
It's like a suggestion rather than a rule, right?
Right,
That's how time works.
That's right. That second hand is always moving. Yeah.
If you're going to have a time, there's a start time, but there's no end time, right? So if you invite me out to your house and you say it starts at 6, I hear 6-ish. And I don't hear it's not like 6 to 8:30, right? I'm like, what is that? Like, we're just barely getting started. I'm just getting comfortable. And that seems like a big stereotype, but some of that is just truth. It's just how it feels, that there's a beginning that is very just kind of suggested, and then we're just going to spend time, like Dr. Ortiz
said. And so the
said.
end is just kind of,
Yeah. Why?
Sometimes the beginning is kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a suggestion.
Yeah, it's a suggestion, yeah.
So.
Let me ask what might be an awkward question, and it moves into some of the context in which we now find ourselves, and it's coming off the questions here. Because of the recent political discourse that has vilified people from Mexico, sometimes I feel strange using the word Mexican. I don't want to sound like I mean it in a derogatory way, but should we continue to use that description? And what is the most comfortable way to refer to people?
You can call me Mexican all you want. I'm Mexican, so it's all right. So when I came to the U.S., I didn't realize what was happening. I was 7 years old, and the other kids, Hispanic kids that were third, fourth generation Hispanics, started calling me Mexican. And I was like, I am Mexican. But I didn't realize what they were saying. They were actually saying, this is the guy that's not from here. This is the guy from across the border. And so I think it's very important to realize that, like Nancy said a little while ago, just because we live in Texas, not everybody is Mexican. So I was having lunch with some people, and one of my friends, he's from El Salvador. And someone said to us, they were being nice. They said, oh, I love Mexican food. Y'all's food is really good. And he said, I'm not Mexican, I'm Salvadorian. And I was like, yeah, he's right, And so obviously the word Mexican is not offensive, but when it's for someone that's not from Mexico, they want to be identified as, I am Central American, I am from South America. So, and I think that has a lot to do with, not wanting to actually get to know the person. Where are you from? Like where are you from? I want to know what your culture is. And so you can call me Mexican all you want. I'm Mexican, so it's okay.
Yeah, I think part of that is just educating yourself, right? So right now, the majority of immigrants aren't coming from Mexico; they're actually coming from Central and South America. So that's part of it. I wasn't sure if I heard it right. This is a non-Hispanic person saying, right? I'm with Marlon. Like I'm Mexican. I'm happy to be Mexican. Most of the time, the thing is people don't think I'm Mexican, but that's another issue. But yeah, that's not offensive. But it's safe to say Hispanic or Latino for most of the time. So if you're just trying to be respectful, I think that's fine. But there is no shame in being Mexican.
You can call me Mexican even though I'm Cuban if you want.
No, you can't.
Just trying to fit in.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I grew up in a Christian family and went to Bible college, and I didn't hear like Jesus Christ's name misused really at all until I worked at a large pharmaceutical plant a couple years ago. And now I work at a job where I sometimes speak more Spanish some days than I do English. And so I can't fathom a Hispanic person saying Jesus Christ like that. And so are there ways that Hispanic culture kind of does that in a different way? And whether or not there are, the second part of the question is, what's a way that we can raise the standard for how they hear Jesus' name or about Christianity?
Is the question, do Hispanic people take the Lord's name in vain? Is that part of the question? Because that's part of what I heard. Because they do.
That's the first part, and the second part is...
I'm not going to teach you how, but they
That's for the brown bag later. So.
The more important question is, how do we raise the standard of how they hear Jesus' name? Because I imagine every culture has, a way of doing that.
I think in part, like a very super simplistic blanket statement is that you do it the way that you show that you bring value to Christ's name in everywhere, in every scenario, to every people, which is by the way that you live. People aren't interested in hearing about Jesus in any language that you speak if you're not living a life that reflects his love and grace and compassion and all of those things.
And Hispanics, like any other group of people, are curious people. So how you live your life and what you say, are you creating curiosity about who Jesus is? And so I would just simply say, live your life and stir some curiosity in them, and they will want to know more. So.
Lynn?
Yeah. It seems to me in the discussions we've had, formal, informal, that there is this repeated theme that surfaces relative to various ethnic groups, and especially students here on campus. And that is, among other things, that I'm not sure how I'm going to be received if I disclose my culture, talk about my culture, express my culture. I heard you kind of allude to that. The clarification I need is, are we talking about all settings, informal settings, friendship settings, classroom settings, interactions with profs? Because in the midst of all this, over the years, I have tried to be especially open, embracing, setting an environment that's safe, and allowing people to do and say whatever they want to. So I'm not sure if I'm inadvertently missing something as to how I can manipulate the classroom setting, at least, in order to accommodate more what you're talking about that you need. Does that make sense?
I think a lot of it goes back to just taking the time to understand, listen, interact with. One example that I give to some students is, what do you call an Asian who was raised in Cuba, lived in Miami, but now is living in South Chicago? Who is that? What is their background? What is their makeup? What do they value? And so I think that what happens within our setting is we tend to even our own culture has done this over time, what's called phenotyping, right? So we see someone, and just based upon the way they look, or maybe even the way they dress, we put them into a certain category. And I think that sometimes, if we were to speak frankly about this, I think we all do that at a certain level. We all do it. And I think these conversations are wonderful to have because at least we're asking the question, and it hopefully raises the level of awareness to it. And so what I would say is, I'm trying to learn even myself, right, not to assume that I know where a person is from, how they grew up, what they think, how they were taught before, their educational philosophies they grew up with, and that all affects everything as well. So there's not a one way to answer that other than to say we are in a world right now that is vastly diverse, and it's going to continue to move in that direction more and more each day. And so the question is, what are the phenotypes that we are creating ourselves or embracing and further advancing? And be careful with that.
And if I can just add to that, so Dr. McLaughlin, I would say across all those different layers of relationship, I would say, yeah, it happens at every layer. And it's easier to navigate sometimes the one-on-one relationships, but even those, they have taken some really uncomfortable conversations with people who were willing to have them and willing to step into the discomfort with me. But the reality is that it does happen whether I'm one-on-one with someone or whether I'm in a classroom or whether I'm in a setting like this. And I think that intentions are important and intentions are good, but intentions can be wrong. So that you can have a good intention and you can be well-intentioned but wrong. And I think that was a little phrase that one of my mentors kind of introduced to me, right, and introduced in our classroom, to be able to say, that's well-intentioned, I want to honor you, but that was still wrong. And that has been really helpful in navigating those kind of spaces, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or I find myself in a classroom setting raising my hand because I disagree, which with me, it just happens a lot. But
Last question here.
So I grew up in a culture in the U.S. that was about 86% Hispanic. And what I've found coming to Dallas is that interacting with Hispanic or Latino people here is completely different. So I would go into a place where I may be the only white person there, and I would have to code switch instead of it being the other way around. So what kind of things do you see that could help this school or these students engage more with the Hispanic community in Dallas specifically?
I think the relationship part is very important. I think, like, going back to what Dr. Ortiz said a little while ago, we're all about relationships and making friendships and getting to know people. The people that know me, when someone asks me, "Hey, how you doing?" I would literally stop my golf cart and I'd be, "All right, you ready for this?" And because that's who we are, and the best way is to actually get to know the person, to actually, because I feel like sometimes the "how you doing" is just like to say, like, to be polite, or it's something that we just say because we say it. But for us, it's actually very important because I actually want to get to know you. Like, I'm not from here. I'm an immigrant, so I want to know who you are. I want to know your culture. And if I ask you how you doing, I'm actually really expecting this conversation. And so if I hear it from the other way around, I'm like, all right, let's do it. So I think it's very important to realize that we as Latinos and Hispanics, we're all about relationships. And if you're looking at it from the church stand view out to the people that are not believers, that's the best way that you're going to reach them. That's the best way to reach Latinos, to establish a relationship with them.
Real quick, what I would add to that is, if you're trying to develop a relationship with a Hispanic, and this probably works with other groups as well, trying to develop a relationship with a Hispanic, and you believe you have gained their trust, assume you have not. Okay? Because it takes time for them to to want to have that rapport with you, want to be able to open up to you. So even in the classroom as professors or here on campus, as you're interacting with students among yourselves, just always be looking about what else can I do or what else can we do to foster a healthy relationship. The other thing I think we have done already at DTS, which is great, and we hope to do even more of it, one of the core values that we try to instill in DTS and Español is this. This is our first core value that we try to live by. That is, how can we begin to engender a visible DTS Hispanic culture? That's important. So whatever space you're operating within, is your space welcoming to a Hispanic? Are they able to open the door, peek in, and say, oh, they might be a safe place to walk into? And so when you walk around our campus now, we have placards with Bible verses in Spanish. We have signs that are directing people in Spanish. We have a website. We have other things. Yes, there's more that we can do, not just for Hispanics, but other groups. But I think we're making some progress. But a lot of it really comes down to trust building, rapport building. Immigration has something to do with it. When I was a young child, I'll tell you this real quick. When I was a young child, my dad had just immigrated here from Cuba. A police officer stops him. He was driving a white Cadillac, 1960-something Cadillac, right? Listening to Engelbert Humperdinck on the 8-track. Does anybody know who that is? No, of course not. Okay, there you go. There's one over there. So, and a police officer stops him, and my dad's English was not very good, and the police officer is saying to him, "Is this your car? Are you? Where are you from?" And I remember sitting in the back seat, being about 6, 7 years old, and listening to this and watching this, and I love my dad's response. His response was, "You're a police officer driving that car. I'm a Hispanic driving this white Cadillac." And he had advanced, he had developed a business and so on and so forth. So he had some level of success that the police officer was not willing to embrace at the moment. But what it did for me as a young man is it helped me to realize, okay, maybe there is something different about me, something different about us. And how do you begin to bridge that gap? A lot of it comes down to trust building and time, which we talked about a lot already today.
Okay, let's thank our panel. Real quickly, a couple of announcements from the Hendricks Center. We regularly have a giftedness program that we offer to students. The next one is on January 25th and 26th. It's full. But I'm just alerting you that if you're interested in getting an analysis of what your strengths and weaknesses might be, what you're wired to do and what you're not wired to do, this giftedness program will be coming up. So when we announce the next one, feel free to step forward and be a part of it. It's a terrific experience to go through, and it allows for a whole lot of self-awareness in terms of the way God has built you. The second announcement is on March 26th, there will not be class, even though it's a class day, because we are going to be hosting a faith and work conference called Equipped. The Hendricks Center is. It's part of a long day that we're going to have focusing on the center. And we have Tim Keller and Tom Nelson from Kansas City and Made to Flourish coming to be our keynote speakers for that event. We have canceled class so that you all are able to attend. So keep your ears and eyes open for information about that. We'll be talking about it a lot in the next few weeks. And you are not just welcome to come, we are hoping you will take advantage of the opportunity to attend. Let me close us in a word of prayer. Father, we know that you've made us in your image, but you've also made us different from one another so that we can help each other to be fully human. Our prayer is that as we explore the way in which you make us the same and different, that we might cling tight to the unity that we have in Christ and to the oneness that he gives us, but that we also might come to appreciate the diverse ways in which you've made us. And we look forward to the day when we be gathered together in heaven, where people of every tribe, every tongue, and every nation will lift up your name, and we will appreciate the scope of reconciliation that your Savior has accomplished and our Savior has accomplished on our behalf, the one who you sent to bring us back together. We pray that we might model that in how we live in this community, and that we might model it in the way in which we minister once we leave this community. We pray that you would lead and guide us in this, because we know that without the direction of your Spirit, it's not possible. And we ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.